Hey guys, today I'm going to be doing a soft-spoken reading series on Stephen King's Misery. I hope you enjoy this video. So hopefully you guys enjoy this. Here you can see it says, "This is for Stephanie and Jim Leonard, who know why. Boy, do they." Goddess, Africa. Chapter 1. Annie. When you look into the abyss also looks into you. Number 1. Yun number 1. Fayon. These sounds even in the haze. Okay, that's just chapter 1, I guess. So I guess I'll be reading 2 chapters then. I hope you guys can hear me well. I'm still working out how to use this device I have, this new device I have. My cats are being weird as usual. But sometimes the sounds, like the pain, faded, and then there was only the haze. He remembered darkness. Solid darkness had come before the haze. Did that mean he was making progress? Let there be light. Even the hazy variety, and the light was good, and so on and so on. Had those sounds existed in the darkness? He didn't know the answers to any of these questions. He didn't know the answers to any of these questions. Did he make sense to ask them? He didn't know the answer to that one either. The pain was somewhere below the sounds. The pain was somewhere below the sounds. The pain was east of the sun and south of his ears. That was all he did know. For some length of time that seemed very long, and so was, since the pain and the stormy haze were the only two things which existed. Those sounds were the only outer reality. He had no idea who he was, or where he was, and cared to know either. Neither. He wished he was dead, but through the pain-soaked haze that filled his mind like a summer storm cloud, he did not know he wished it. As time passed, he became aware that there were periods of non-pain, and that these had a cyclic quality. And for the first time since emerging from the total blackness which had prologued the haze, he had a thought which existed apart from whatever his current situation was. This thought was of a broken-off piling which had jutted from the sand at Revere Beach. His mother and father had taken him to Revere Beach often when he was a kid. And he had always insisted that they spread their blanket where he could keep an eye on that piling, which looked to him like the single jutting fang of a buried monster. He liked to sit and watch the water come up until it covered the piling. Then hours later, after the sandwiches and potato salad had been eaten, after the last few drops of Kool-Aid had been coaxed from his father's big thermos, just before his mother said it was time to pack up and start home, the top of the rotted piling would begin to show again, just to peek and flash between the incoming waves at first, then more and more. By the time the trash was stashed in the big drum with "Keep Your Beach Clean" stenciled on the side, Polly's beach toys picked up. "That's my name, Polly. I'm Polly, and tonight Ma'll put Johnson's baby oil on my sunburn," he thought inside the thunderhead where he now lived. and the blanket folded again. The piling had almost wholly reapered its blackish, slime-smooth sides surrounded by sudsy scuds of foam. It was the tide. His father had tried to explain, but he had always known it was the piling. The tide came and went. The piling stayed. It was just that sometimes you couldn't see it. Without the piling, there was no tide. This memory circled and circled, maddening, like a sluggish fly. He groped for whatever it might mean, but for a long time the sounds interrupted. Fayun read everything. Umberun. Sometimes the sounds stopped. Sometimes he stopped. His first really clear memory of this now, the now outside the storm haze, was of stopping, of being suddenly aware he just couldn't pull another breath, and that was all right. And that was good. That was in fact just peachy keen. He could take a certain level of pain, but enough was enough, and he was glad to be getting out of the game. Then there was a mouth clamped over his, a mouth which was unmistakably a woman's mouth in spite of its hard, spitless lips, and the wind from this woman's mouth blew into his own mouth and down his throat, puffing his lungs. And when the lips were pulled back, he smelled his warder for the first time. Smelled her on the outrush of the breath that she had forced into him the way a man might force a part of himself into an unwilling woman. A dreadful mixed stench of vanilla cookies and chocolate ice cream, chicken gravy, and peanut butter fudge. He heard a voice screaming, "Breathe, goddammit! Breathe, Paul!" The lips clamped down again. The breath blew down his throat again, blew down it like the dank suck of wind which follows a fast subway train, pulling sheets of newspaper and candy wrappers after it, and the lips were withdrawn, and he thought, for Christ's sake, don't let any of it through your nose, but he couldn't help it, and oh, that stink, that effing stink. Breathe, goddamn you, the unseen voice shrieked, and he thought, I will, anything, please, just don't that anymore, don't do that anymore, don't infect me anymore, and he tried. But before he could really get started, her lips were clamped over his again, lips as dry and dead as strips of salted leather, and she raped him full of her air again. When she took her lips away this time, he did not let her breathe out, but pushed it and whooped it in a gigantic breath of his own, shoved it out, waited for his unseen chest to go up again on its own, as it had been doing his whole life without any help from him. When it didn't, he gave another giant whooping gasp, and then he was breathing again on his own, and doing it as fast as he could to flush the smell and taste of her out of him. Normal air had never tasted so fine. He began to fade back into the haze again, but before the dimming world was gone entirely, he heard the woman's voice mutter, "Phew, that was a close one." Not close enough, he thought, and fell asleep. He dreamed of the piling, so real he felt he could almost reach out and slide his palm over its green-black fissured curve. When he came back to his former state of semi-consciousness, he was able to make the connection between the piling and his current situation. It seemed to float into his hand. The pain wasn't tidal. That was the lesson of the dream, which was really a memory. The pain only appeared to come and go. The pain was like the piling, sometimes covered and sometimes visible, but always there. When the pain wasn't harrying him through the deep stone grayness of his cloud, he was dumbly grateful, but he was no longer fooled. It was still there, waiting to return. And there was not just one piling, but two. The pain was the pilings. A part of him knew for a long time before most of his mind had knowledge of knowing that the shattered pilings were his own shattered legs. But it was still a long time before he was finally able to break the dried scum of saliva that had glued his lips together and croak out, "Where am I?" to the woman who sat by his bed with a book in her hands. The name of the man who had written the book was Paul Sheldon. He recognized it as his own with no surprise. Sidewinder, Colorado, she said when he was finally able to ask the question. My name's Annie Wilkes, and I know, he said. You're my #1 fan. Yes, she said, smiling. That's just what I am. Chapter 3. I guess I'll start reading a couple more chapters since they're pretty short. Darkness, then the pain and the haze, then the awareness that although the pain was constant, it was sometimes buried by an uneasy compromise which he supposed was relief. The first real memory, stopping and being raped back into life by the woman's stinking breath. Next real memory, her fingers pushing something into his mouth at regular intervals, something like contact capsules. Only since there was no water, they only sat in his mouth, and when they melted, there was an incredibly bitter taste that was a little like the taste of aspirin. It would have been good to spit the bitter taste out, but he knew better than to do it, because it was that bitter taste which brought the high tide in over the piling, brought the high tide of pilings. It's pilings, there are two fine now, just hush, just hush, hush, and made it seem gone for a while. These things all came at widely spaced intervals, but then, as the pain itself began not to recede, but to erode, as that Revere Beach piling must itself have eroded, he thought, because nothing is forever, although the child he had been would have scoffed at such heresy. Outside things began to impinge more rapidly until the objective world, with all its right of memory, experience, and prejudice, had pretty much re-established itself. He was Paul Sheldon, who wrote novels of two kinds, good ones and bestsellers. He had been married and divorced twice. He spoke too much, or had before all this, whatever all this was. Something very bad had happened to him, but he was still alive. That dark gray cloud began to dissipate faster and faster. It would be yet a while before his #1 fan brought him the old clacking royal with the grinning gout mouth and the ducky doddle's voice, but Paul understood long before then that he was in a hell of a jam. That prescient part of his mind saw her before he knew he was seeing her, and must surely have understood her before he knew That prescient part of his mind saw her before he knew he was seeing her, and must surely have understood her before he knew he was understanding her. Why else did he associate such dour, ominous images with her? Whenever she came into the room, he thought of the graven images worshipped by superstitious African tribes in the novels of H. Rider Haggard, and Stones and Doom. The image of Annie Wilkes as an African idol out of she or King Solomon's minds was both ludicrous and queerly apt. She was a big woman who, other than the large but unwelcoming swell of her bosom under the gray cardigan sweater she always wore, seemed to have no feminine curves at all. There was no defined roundness of hip or buttock, or even calf below the endless succession of wool skirts she wore in the house. She retired to her unseen bedroom to put on jeans before doing her outside chores. Her body was big but not generous. There was a feeling about her of clots and roadblocks rather than welcoming orifices, or even open spaces, areas of hiatus. Most of all, she gave him a disturbing sense of solidity, as if she might not have any blood vessels or even internal organs, as if she might be only solid Annie Wilkes from side to side and top to bottom. He felt more and more convinced that her eyes which appeared to move, or actually just painted on, and they moved no more than the eyes of portraits, which appeared to follow you to wherever you move in the room where they hang. It seemed to him that if he made the first 2 fingers of his hand into a 5 and attempted to poke them up her nostrils, into a V, and attempted to poke them up in her nostrils, they might go less than 1/8 of an inch before encountering a solid, if slightly yielding, obstruction, that even her gray cardigan and frumpy house skirts and faded outside work jeans were part of that solid, fibrous, unchaneled body. So his feeling that she was like an idol in a perfervid novel was not really surprising at all. Like an idol, she gave only one thing, a feeling of unease deepening steadily toward terror. Like an idol, she took everything else. No, wait, that wasn't quite fair. She did give something else. She gave him the pills that brought the tide in over the pilings. The pills were the tide. Annie Wilkes was the lunar presence which pulled them into his mouth like jetsam on a wave. She brought him 2 every 6 hours, first announcing her presence only as a pair of fingers poking into his mouth, and soon enough he learned to suck eagerly at those poking fingers in spite of the bitter taste. Later appearing in her cardigan sweater and one of her half-dozen skirts, usually with a paperback copy of one of his novels tucked under her arm. At night she appeared to him in a fuzzy pink robe, her face shiny with some sort of cream. He could have named the main ingredient easily enough, even though he had never seen the bottle from which she tipped it. The sheepy smell of the lanolin was strong and proclamatory, shaking him out of his frowsy, dream-thick sleep with the pills nestled in her hand and the poxy moon nestled in the window over one of her solid shoulders. After a while, after his alarm had become too great to be ignored, he was able to find out what she was feeding him. It was a painkiller with a heavy codeine base called Novril. The reason she had to bring him the bedpan so infrequently was not only because he was on a diet consisting entirely of liquids and gelatins. Earlier, when he was in the cloud, she had fed him intravenously, but also because Novril had a tendency to cause constipation in patients taking it. Another side effect, a rather more serious one, was respiratory depression in sensitive patients. Paul was not particularly sensitive, even though he had been a heavy smoker for nearly 18 years, but his breathing had stopped nonetheless on at least one occasion. There might have been others, in the haze that he did not remember. That was the time she gave him a mouth-to-mouth. It might have just been one of those things which happened, but he later came to suspect she had nearly killed him with an accidental overdose. She didn't know as much, but what she was doing as she believed that she did. That was only one of the things about Annie that scared him. He discovered 3 things almost simultaneously, about 10 days after having emerged from the dark cloud. The first was that Annie Wilkes had a great deal of Novril. She had, in fact, a great many drugs of all kinds. The second was that he was hooked on Novril. The third was that Annie Wilkes was dangerously crazy. Okay, guys. Well, that's all I'm going to be reading today from Stephen King's Misery. I'm coincidentally watching the series Castle Rock Season 2. That's, I guess, based off of the character Annie Wilkes. Misery, from Misery, so it's It's a really good series. I'm really enjoying it. I hope you guys liked this video. Give it a thumbs up if you'd like to see more videos like this. I will do videos in the future reading the next coming chapters. So yeah, hope you enjoyed and you guys have a great day.